Go.
We spent our honeymoon in a
Service station.
by Jacqueline Cordray. Everything had gone so well. Our storybook wedding, except for the very first wet, accumulative snowfall of the season, had come off with only our hitch, and we were on our way to Park South for an off-season honeymoon. Little did we know that we would spend that time we look back on and remember, largely in a
Service station.
Leaving West Virginia for our Outer Banks destination in North Carolina, we visited our first friend on the road, aka
Service station.
in the very next town. My cautious bridegroom decided that it would be wise to have the snow sheds put up. So there we stood at almost midnight, conspicuous by my white orchid, Jackie Kennedy pillbox, hat, and black fox muff in a cold.
Service station.
While a young attendant changed our tires in a hurry, then made a declined offer to give the honeymoon car a quick wash job.
We arrived finally at our first night destination and fell into bed. Dead tired to awaken in the morning to a flat tire, caused by that hurried tire change. It had resulted in a punctured tooth. I should explain here that our car, although 3 years old, was brand new to us at the time, and of course bore the image of a shiny black limousine carrying us to utopia. Well, I stood at the lodge window watching while my one-day husband repeatedly jacked up our new car, and the jack just as quickly gave way and fell to the ground. Eventually, he conquered the thing. Repairs were made on the tire while we were at breakfast, and we left town about the time we should have been stopping for the night.
But the worst was yet to come. Because we had lost so much time waiting for tires, we decided to drive late across the mountains and into Virginia. So we gave up a leisurely first day married honeymoon dinner, grabbed a hamburger and a milkshake at Dairy Queen, and headed for the next date. Just as we were in the middle of nowhere, we spotted a chunk of peaceful-looking snow in the middle of the road, and just as soon heard a what seemed like world-shattering scraping that we were sure must have taken off the whole bottom of the car.
After some worried moments and the dual conviction that our honeymoon was over right there in the dark on the top of the mountain, Bud, my husband, crawled under the car and pulled out a pretzel-shaped tailpipe, tossed it over the hill, and got out the jack again. When he had the rear end of the car lifted above the troublemaking snow-covered rock, I drove the car off the jack, sure that I would certainly keep going all the way down the mountain for 7 or 8,000 feet. Sans husband.
When we roared into the next small town with dragging muffler, there was one small service station open, but one that we were glad to see for a change. The owner's supply of wire was limited to about a foot's worth, but between my husband's and the service station attendant stretching, it did the job okay, and we went on.
Leaving stop number 2, the next morning in the rain that seemed to be following us southward, we discovered it was time to stop to get air put into that problem tire again. To top off our carefree trip, so far, the windshield wiper blade on the driver's side, of course, kept sliding off, necessitating a stop for pushing repairs about every 2 miles.
We went on like this to Norfolk, rain pouring down and wipers sliding off all the way. We got in early for a change, comparatively anyway. So we dressed and started out for a decent dinner. Well, it happened again! At the intersection which I was sure must be the busiest in Norfolk, that blankety-blank tire went flat. No.
Service station.
In sight. Just an empty lot, the rain coming down with a force next to flood stage. amid cursing and sneezing by my disgusted spouse and a very dampened feeling and a flood of tears on my part. The tire was changed once more and left at a
service station.
overnight. To be sure, it was patched right this time.
Well, that was the understatement of the year. The next day's travel of our service station tour took us out of the city area and into the wide open spaces of North Carolina. And then that tire went down again. Figuring that this was our trouble for the day, we laughingly located a small service station and decided to invest in a new tube. What we'd spent on repairs and tips for fast service already could have bought too. And while we were at it, we played big spenders and installed a new wiper blade too. At last, our troubles were over.
Our destination, although only for a few hours, was Ocracoke Island in the Outer Banks. It was off-season, but it was beautiful and practically all ours. That is, until we had to summon the Coast Guard to the rescue.
With an eye to catching the early ferry back to the next island, we stopped for 1 minute to get a last view of the ocean from Ocracoke. Bud, obliging his bride, decided to drive as close as he could. As he started to back up a sandy ramp that said for four-wheel drive vehicles only, I said, "You better not," but it was too late. We were bumper deep in sand with no visible meanings of getting out. 2 hours later, after a nerve-wracking ride back into town in a very old Jeep that happened to come along and a ride back in a Coast Guard power wagon that pulled the car from its sandy bed, we caught that ferry.
By now, we were in nothing short of a hurry just to get home. But my husband is one of those men who plays games with that E mark on the gas gauge. He'll drive on and on, risking running out as long as he thinks he'll find a fast service station or cheaper gas up ahead. Well, the next thing we discovered is that this just isn't done in an island community that's mostly closed in the winter. We drove and drove in our eagerness to catch the next ferry until we passed by and it was the last open service station. Finally convinced, Bud turned around and headed back to it. And this time, luck was with us. The gas-eating monster coughed dry just as we coasted into the general store service station.
Over that hurdle, we got to the next island on a ferry, which we were sure wandered around lost in the middle of the Atlantic for a while. Soon after we landed, the car's temperature gauge started going wild, and once more we pulled into a
service station.
with the welcome light. Nothing was wrong, apparently, but the thing continued to push its way upward, off, and on during the rest of the trip. As we were crossing to the mainland on a bridge that must be as long as a fish story is tall, we heard a scraping noise once again, but this time it was bumping, like a muffler falling off.
Just hope there's a service station at the end of this bridge, Bud said. And as I strained my eyes to see what the lighted sign up ahead said, I hoped. There was one. Well, actually, it was a general store that sold gas on the side. Their water supply was lower than our first helpers. They had none. So Bud, the attendant just minded the store, took that sturdy foot we picked up in Virginia, stretched it, and rewired the muffler well enough to get our nice destination.
In the morning, we set out to buy a new muffler. That muffler installation was the longest
Service station
visit yet, but we laid out $10 more for fast service. 3 boys went to work on it, and we left there about the middle of the afternoon.
Now surely we could make it home without further incident, but just as we got far enough out of town that it would be foolish to go back, the muffler began to rattle. It rattled incessantly all the way to Virginia, where we spent the night.
In our eagerness to get home, we loaded the car before dawn the next day and started out. About 5 a.m., we stopped the car before, about 5 a.m., we stopped at another in our long list of service stations to get the rattle fixed. The grease pit there made it impossible to repair it, however, so we kept heading homeward, rattling all the way.
Most people look back on their honeymoon as one whirl of dinners, dancing, and happy times. Ours, it was so jinxed, it was ridiculous. We had to cut it short because our money went for car repairs. We had a honeymoon dinner only one night. It seemed as though we traveled constantly, and we didn't have time to see one movie or dance one step.
But we'll never forget it. How could we, after 6 or 7 more trips to
Service station.
that muffler's still rattling.